Right, 7:40 on this Friday morning, time for the newspapers. It is OTB AM, the Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball. Do keep your comments coming into us. Going to kick things off with the Irish Daily Mail this morning. I mentioned the happy one. Well, there he is. Pretty in purple, Jose Mourinho at his first press conference as Tottenham manager yesterday. Jose and his Jim Jams, new Spurs boss, delivers a masterclass at his first press conference. There's a lot of imagery of Jose in a onesie at various points over the court. Did he mention something to do with pyjamas at some point in his press conference? Was this what happened?
Going to sleep in his Spurs pyjamas or something of that description, he said, and the special onesie is obviously something that's been...
Some of them have a mock-up that we might come to a little bit later on.
Oh, yeah, well, that's what I thought it was. But there is an actual Tottenham onesie. I thought that the Sun...
It's 30 quid, you can buy a onesie for 30 quid.
Right, okay, I thought the Sun just made up a onesie and just put it on Mourinho, but the Guardian on the back page actually has their Tottenham onesie.
30 quid, pretty nice actually, yeah.
Good Christmas gift.
Would you be a onesie man? I could see you being a onesie man.
I could probably rock a onesie, but I've never done it so far in my life, so that could be a New Year's resolution.
A bit too toasty, is what I would think.
Depends on where you are, obviously. If you're in the South Pole, then probably not toasty enough.
Really is good to have you back on. Mourinho says the Spurs can win the title next year, writes Frank Kent here in the Irish Daily Mail this morning. And O'Gara's Anglo-Saxon tactics under scrutiny, writes Rory Keane. This is Ronan O'Gara, and the feeling, as Rory Keane writes, feeling the heat in France with La Rochelle head coach coming under scrutiny over his Anglo-Saxon approach. Very early days, obviously, but the director of rugby at the club, John O'Gibbs, saying that Ronan's put in place a defensive system completely different from what was practised until then. And very much saying that the players on board with this. There's no question about Ronan O'Gara's future. I mean, it's incredibly early to be even exploring those kind of thoughts. And then one of the players here, the La Rochelle flanker, Kevin Gourdon, admitted that the squad are going to need time to adapt to O'Gara's methods. It's a different management, a different culture, and it's very interesting. We have a very special way of working. I would say it's Anglo-Saxon. It's more in the precision, it is more framed, and you can check out a long and interesting, as he says himself there, conversation with Ronan O'Gara with us in the last couple of weeks about his own challenges in relation to the culture of driving that La Rochelle team on.
The Irish Times this morning leads with the rugby. Ulster need to be at their best to contain Clermont threat. French side are oozing quality, but Ulster have had their measure before in Belfast. Matt Williams, meanwhile, is saying Leon look like sheep in Wolves' clothing. So who do you think the Champions Cup Wolfpack club is, according to Matt Williams here? There are three teams he names.
Leinster.
Yes.
Saracens.
No.
I mean, Clermont.
No.
Toulouse.
Yes. One more.
I mean, Munster?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, the Wolves get to eat the sheep. Leinster, Munster and Toulouse are card-carrying members of the Champions Cup Wolfpack Club. So if you're one of those supporters, congratulations to you on this Friday morning. You've got a card to the Wolfpack. And Clermont looking towards the summit once again. French club's title credentials will be seriously examined, I should say, by Ulster and Belfast tonight.
The Irish Independent sports section, meanwhile, it's Jose here again, spurred on to the title. We can win the league next season, says Jose Mourinho there. Cullen to Colin, the experience of Carney for tricky Leon test, I should say. Keane Tracy here out of the weekend of Hunting Cup that Rob Carney, it seems, is going to get a recall there to 15. Robbie Henshaw too in line to make his full return after injury there. And an interesting one here from Donica Boyle, who says that Limerick call off medals event after New York row. This is a story I'm sure you'll have followed during the week on plenty of platforms, including on our own. But a presentation night for the Limerick hurlers has been cancelled just days after two members of the squad were sent home early from New York, writes Donica Boyle here. They were to pick up their Munster Championship and their league winners' medals from the 2019 campaign at a reception in Limerick this evening. Following those events, it's been postponed. No indication yet if it's actually going to go ahead. You would think that, given everything that's going on and wanting to avoid being in the glare of the headlines, might mean that actually that event just gets pulled entirely. But an interesting line there from Donica Boyle. And Schmidt shows that he's still far from being an open book, writes Rory O'Connor. It's Rory's review of Joe Schmidt's book that Rory was in with Nathan last night and said that he had picked it up the night before and had sort of chewed it up in whatever that time frame was. I'm just trying to think how best to describe Rory's review. He wasn't that complimentary about it, I suppose, would be the short story. Just a lot of blanks. Felt that it would really have benefited from somebody, a journalist or an author, sitting alongside him to hold a mirror up, as he put it, to the various points that Joe Schmidt would have made, or the lack of detail that he would have given probably around, like, his review of the World Cup is pretty brief, I understand. I haven't read it, so I mean, I'm really not sure. It's broken into 3 segments. It's like Joe Schmidt's life as a kid growing up in New Zealand, which it seems by all accounts he'd written in partnership, he says, with his mum, who passed away just before the World Cup warm-ups began. So I'm sure that's a very special thing for him. Middle third about his coaching philosophy, and then the final third, which is really the one that I think the main reason that people would have bought the book, you know, detailing his time in Ireland and spilling the beans, but the beans remain in the can, it seems.
He's sparse enough with his beans, I'd suggest. Like, I don't know, if you're Joe Schmidt sitting down to write that book, you probably are saying to yourself, I don't really need to reveal much here. People are going to pick up this book anyway. Once they see my face in the front of a book this Christmas, they're probably going to buy that book. And no bad reviews can take it away. And there will be people who will be interested in just hearing from the horse's mouth when it comes to what actually happened at the World Cup, regardless of how kind of fully giving he is on that. They're still reading Joe Schmidt saying, well, we were kind of off it against Japan. Now, he may not say fully why exactly we were off it, but he is still saying it, and perhaps it has an appeal to some people. But I haven't read it so far. Certainly the passages we've got in the newspapers and stuff like that, they're not a million miles away from the Schmidt you would hear in a press conference.
And that's the difficulty. And even Rory points out about the name of the book is Ordinary Joe, and Rory points out that, like, you could call Joe many things, but ordinary is definitely not one of them. He says, like, he's an extraordinary guy that he's followed over all of his years in Ireland, and like the idea of calling it Ordinary Joe speaks very much to what Joe Schmidt wants people to think about him rather than what he actually is, which Rory says, I'm quoting Rory a lot because I haven't read the book, but saying that actually that's the tone that the book follows after that.
Yeah, too humble to make a good book, is that what he's saying? The Irish Examiner sports section leads with an interesting one here from Graham Cummins. To this day, people ask me, did you do it? So it's right inside the sports section today. I'd like to be remembered for being marked by Van Dijk and Maguire, but I fear I won't, he says. He's writing here today about 5.5 years ago. Then Preston striker Graham Cummins and his wife woke to officers from Britain's National Crime Agency hammering at their front door. Accusations of match spot fixing and time in a jail cell followed. Though he was cleared of all wrongdoing, the stigma of the episode remains. Here, the ex-Cork City man writes about the experience for the first time. It's worth giving that a read a little bit later on. And elsewhere in the Irish Examiner this morning, Ronan O'Gara is saying Mike Prendergast has done plenty of Bulgarines to get to the Champs-Elysees. And we've also got interesting stuff on GAA today. It's not really mentioned on the front of the Irish Examiner today. We might come back to it in a moment, or we can get into it now, the GAA fixtures situation. So this is something that's come to light this week when the CPA, I guess, walked away from the GAA's National Fixtures Task Force. And I didn't actually know that this was going to be a fairly important moment in how we see future championship structures. And John Fogarty's got a good piece about the 3 senior football championship proposals set for consideration. So Central Council are going to meet over, I don't know, is it today or tomorrow, but certainly before the close of the weekend. And they'll have these 3 different motions from the National Fixtures Task Force, which means that we could have another special Congress. They're getting less and less special with the more we have. It will be the 3rd Congress in the space of 8 months, I think it is, because you've obviously got your annual Congress at the start of the year, but then a special Congress perhaps next May. And these are the 3 proposals that they're going to be working with, according to Fogarty. So the first one is, as the CPA calls it, the improved status quo. This one would see the Super 8s retained, but it would condense the inter-county season, basically. More time for clubs, less time for counties. There would be 30 weeks, basically, would be used for inter-county football, and that includes everything, including pre-season competitions.
Stringently, in a way that isn't at the minute. And that the club month and that sort of stuff that were set aside that are kind of loosely adhered to.
Yes.
The recommendation here is that actually that gets entirely ring-fenced. And
well, that's a part of all the proposals, as far as I can make out here. Right. The structure number 2 is called the flip, also coined by the CPA, I understand. So this is basically where the league format gets moved to the summer and it becomes a championship. So the counties are beginning their campaigns at the same time, which, as you say, plays nicely into the whole April club-only month. And then provincial leagues could replace national leagues in the spring, reports Fogarty. And then the 3rd structure is the 4x8 proposal. So you would obviously have 4 groups of 8 Champions League. Well, it's not Champions League style whatsoever. What am I talking about? So some counties from Leinster and Ulster would obviously have to transfer to Connacht and Munster to make up the numbers here. And the CPA have given, or had, I should say, given conditional support to the flip and to the 4x8 proposal. but they felt that the recommendations weren't taken on enough, and they've actually stepped away from things. Just a couple of the other points. County boards would now be given deadlines to submit club fixtures, which is an important one. So presumably at the start of the year, maybe midway through the previous year, you have to submit to Croke Park where exactly your calendar is and how it is going to fit into the overall structure. And Croke Park will obviously respond and say, well, that's doable, well done, go about your business. And we won't have the mess that we often have at this time of the year, especially when club championships just pile into provincial championships, which pile into All-Ireland championships, which pile into pre-season and college competitions and all that sort of stuff. So that's a positive step. And then the April club-only month is going to be enshrined in rule, which you mentioned. This would basically just mean that the championship doesn't start till midway through May or at the end of May, so that teams have 3 weeks of preparation after April, because that was the issue. There was only clubs like Kerry who were actually implementing their club-only month in April because they didn't play till the June bank holiday, whereas some teams, like in the Leinster Football Championship, for example, who had to be out the first or second week of May, there's no way you could possibly have a proper club-only month in April. And then there is one proposal, according to Fogarty, he doesn't mention, which suggests back-to-back All-Irelands in both codes. So you'd have the hurling final 1 week and then the football final the week right after. Again, further evidence of them trying to condense the season. It'll be interesting to see how these play out, going to Central Council, as I say, over the next couple of days, and then special Congress next May. Limber up for that.
It all seems to make utter sense to me, is the one thing. Like, I can't remember a time with such an amount of radical changes. There's been bits and pieces of tweaking, obviously, maybe none more so than the last couple of years with the Super 8s. Probably, I think it's fair enough to say, none more so. But the first time I can remember that amount of radical changes, and all of them actually, like a lot of them, the flip has been spoken about for a number of years now, like the essentially tucking away of the provincial championships into another part of the year, that it is one of the sacred lambs. That the difficulty is that the various championships tend to get spoken about in the one brush or in the one breath, and like there's such a diversity of, on one hand, nonsense championships at times versus like championships that actually mean something, like the Munster Hurling Championship that's been revised over the last couple of years. So I don't know, in an overall sense, they all seem to make a lot of sense. And then obviously the CPA had their input into it, and then they've walked away in the last couple of days. Like, but it does seem as if they were almost behind a lot of these, but maybe that there were certain aspects of it that they, I don't know. I'd like to hear the CPA's response to what in light of these now, because I wasn't expecting, after what the CPA had done, I kind of felt, we must be nowhere near a solution. And then suddenly a couple of days later, maybe not by coincidence, but a couple of days later, the actual proposals have suddenly appeared somewhere and seem to make a lot of sense.
There could be different elements to this behind the surface that we don't see, like how much access do the counties actually have to their inter-county players, and what are the actual guarantees for club players at certain points of the year, which I would imagine, CPA can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I understand that one of their kind of important parts, I'd imagine, for any club player is that you get meaningful games in a good part of the year. This is still very much ring fencing a lot of the summertime, that April is your month, and then you ain't seeing any meaningful club football until September time. So perhaps that's the sticking point. I don't know. I'm sure that we'll hear from them soon to tell us what exactly they disagreed with on this. But I think these are really radical. Like the flip and the 4x8 proposals are really radical. The flip in particular, for me, is just something that could have huge ramifications down the line, because what happens is you move the provincial championships to earlier in the year in a league format, and then the summer gets the National League. We get our best competition in the summer. The knock-on effect is that all focus then goes on the National League then. Like, I think, say, this year you see the celebrations when Mayo win the National League. Fair enough, you can target a competition, win it, and then you can put, say, 80% of your resources into the league or into the championship. Whereas this way it'll become a 100-0 flip, and then like the provincial councils are probably like looking at each other thinking, what is going to happen here, because those provincial leagues are just going to fade into mediocrity and eventually irrelevance. Well, and that is no bad thing. Like, a lot of people might suggest that the provincial championships just need to be scrapped immediately. This could be the first step towards that.
Well, the difficulty is that exact point that I was making earlier on, that some of them are like really worth watching and very competitive and all that sort of stuff, and then other ones like the Leinster Football Championship is just a total formality from start to finish. But like, so you have that on the one hand, and you have the Munster Hurling Championship on the other hand, that like will be highly attended.
Well, the hurling is going to be safe.
Yeah.
This is football only.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah. All right.
So I don't know. Like, like the knockout element of a provincial championship, of course, is there is an appeal to the knockout element of championship, especially when it seems to be just a good solution when players are amateurs, obviously, and you can't be playing midweek and things like that. But I think there's a lot of potential positives from these proposals if they make it through. But I would like to hear what exactly there were some misgivings about from the CPA.
We will hear from that, I'm sure, in the next little while. Let's move on to the Irish Daily Star this morning. It's the humble one. Here writes Paul Brown, modest Mourinho vows to win the title next season with Spurs. We've Vaughan fears for Dublin duo. This is Mark Vaughan with concerns over Cian O'Sullivan and Rory O'Carroll, his club mates, in relation to their age and injury profile. Aviva boost for Northern Ireland will play a couple of their Euro 2020 group games in the Aviva Stadium, which would be an unusual one to say the least, if they obviously come through the Nations League playoff qualifiers, finals, whatever they're called. And Leinster had fake Schmidt account shut is one of the other interesting lines from the... I mean, it's not that interesting, but it's an indicator of where the book is at. Derek Foley writing here that during his time at Leinster, there was a fake Twitter account set up called The Real Joe Schmidt, as Joe himself says, tweeting some pretty cynical and contentious things, especially about Munster. And they went and shut it down. But I mean, they could be as cynical and contentious as you like, but like, it wasn't from him, and everybody would have understood that. It was a bit of crack. I have no recollection of the account.
Well, you see, that's the thing. I have no recollection of the account either. Maybe it did come across as The Real Joe Schmidt, and it could have been done so well. Some of those parody accounts are just so good.
Yeah.
You're actually not quite sure sometimes whether or not it's real. Back page, or maybe that's just me. Back page of there's a fact check joke to be made here somewhere on Twitter, but I'll leave that to you. Back page of the Guardian is the special onesie. Mourinho delighted to be back in his natural habitat, and there at the bottom left you can see the tiny little Tottenham onesie that Jose Mourinho potentially wears to bed. Olive Branch. Emery says Xhaka is ready to make his Arsenal return, and eyes on prize. Great Britain set up Davis Cup quarter-final with Germany.
The Sun, meanwhile, have really gone to town on the onesie stuff here. This is a special onesie. It's good, to be fair.
Yeah, they also had it on the Guardian.
Properly like him in a onesie.
See, that was what I thought. It was a great Photoshop job. How on earth have they done that? Fantastic. And I was like, great fake onesie. But it actually exists.
Thing. 30 quid. Mourinho, I'll kip in Spurs pyjamas. I was a true blue till they asked me, and we can win the title next season. That's more quotes from Jose inside.
The back page of the Mirror is Mourinho talking about bringing back the glory days. Jose says Spurs come in first title for 60 years next season. Tyg Byrne says he can't wait for Munster's clash with Ryan, and Rory McIlroy says that was the best shot I have hit all season. Marcus Rashford, meanwhile, the top four is not good enough for United. ... We need a trophy.
The Telegraph, meanwhile, is Mourinho, we can win the title next season, and stuff but the Davis Cup.
The Herald, we can win the league. New look Mourinho vows to hold on to star players, obviously referring to next season. Seamus is up for the fight, says Silva, that's Marco Silva, praising Seamus Coleman for his attitude for coping with the fact that he's been left out of the starting 11. And which Jose will turn up at Spurs? Richard Dunn is suggesting that Mourinho could be the right man.
The Times London edition, meanwhile, is obviously more Mourinho stuff here. He is on the training ground at Tottenham yesterday, and a pretty fascinating story here, an exclusive from Matt Lawton. Athletics boss, let band partner coach. This is the story that the new chief exec of UK Athletics is facing questions over why her husband was allowed to continue coaching at Athletics Club, where she was vice chairwoman, despite being banned from teaching for having an inappropriate relationship with a 15-year-old schoolgirl. This is in relation to the new head of UK Athletics that is still 9 days from taking on the big job.
The Racing Post this morning, picture of footpad. Off to a flyer, they say. The Arkle winners cut for King George and Ryanair after comeback win. And Doyle hits 100 as she races towards all-time record. This is Holly Doyle, who's become only the third ever female jockey in Britain to ride 100 winners in a calendar year. Back page of the Racing Post is ready to raid the cottage. Hoops can threaten big spending Fulham. It's Fulham against QPR tonight at 7:45.